Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 305 Insights. I'm your host, Alan Somerton, and today we're going to be looking over Week 12 of the college football weekend. Now, there's a lot of intriguing games going on in terms of where certain people may land in the college football playoff rankings, what's going on with certain teams in terms of their coaching staff moving forward, and yeah, despite FSU and UM being on a bye week this week, we still want to discuss what's been going on in the college football world. So I wanted to start off with a simple question. What is going down in the Bayou? I mean, back-to-back 10-win seasons. You lose Jane Daniels, but you hire a new offensive coordinator, hire a new defensive coordinator, and you're having certain expectations at LSU. Not saying you're going to compete for a national championship, whatever, things like that, but you were expecting probably another 10-win season. And it's kind of fallen apart over the past few games. 3 straight losses. And they lost to LSU, LSU lost to Florida for the first time since 2018, 27-16. And coming into the season, in the big game previews of college football, I picked LSU USC as a big matchup on opening weekend because of where the two teams were possibly headed, in the sense of if they met expectations versus if they didn't meet expectations. And one of the things we pointed out on this podcast was the lack of depth at defensive tackle for LSU. And overall, this defense being a little suspect because of, hiring the new coordinators and the lack of talent in terms on a depth basis for this team. And you were wondering if the offense would be able to overcome that. And the answer is clearly no. You saw it opening weekend against USC, and then in these past 3 losses. Now, let's preface this by saying Brian Kelly is a top-tier college football coach. Say what you want about his ability to communicate with the kids on the field, in the sense of, he might be always yelling and not finding the right way to get his point across, but this is going to be the first time he hasn't won 10 games in the past 8 years. He's won 7 seasons of 10 wins, 7 straight years. And that includes the Notre Dame run as well. And it pretty much started when he went 4-8 at Notre Dame, and he completely rebooted himself as a coach with how he addressed the offense and the defense. And, he evolved with the times, so to speak. But the concerning part is, again, the lack of overall talent on this team. They do have a good quarterback, a good group of wide receivers, some really good offensive linemen, and little bits and pieces on the defensive side like Harold Perkins before he went out. But yeah, it's just once certain pieces start getting banged up or injured or out for the year, it's not pretty. And also, in this Florida game, they were able to run the ball effectively. Their 2 running backs had a combined 160 yards. But overall, they've become a very one-dimensional team. And that's led to Garrett Nussmeier being not as advertised in a sense, because he's thrown, I believe it's 5 or 6 picks in the last 3 games. And even in this game, he only had 260 passing yards. But it's year 3. You can't really put the blame on Ed Orgeron for the cupboards being bare of talent, especially in the transfer portal era. And coming into the season, Brian Kelly and company did say that they didn't want to overpay for talent. There's a reason why you have to pay for talent. It's because it's in the name of itself. They're talent. And defensive tackle is a premium position. Defensive line is a premium position. And if you need help with that, you're going to have to pay for it unless you're recruiting in the high school recruiting rankings. Now, they had a top 10 class for the 2024 recruiting class. Now, may not see that entirely this season because, you still want to develop the kids into and mold them into what you expect them to be next season. And then they have the number 6 recruiting class for 2025. So there is talent coming in. But again, you're going to have to use the transfer portal to make sure that you compensate for the loss of graduating talent and or other talents that are leaving in the transfer portal. So again, this isn't the LSU that Brian Kelly was expecting to take over in the sense of this whole transfer portal stuff opening up over the past few years. A lot of these coaches thought it'd be easier going to some of these blue bloods because, especially LSU, with their history and the amount of talent that they have that's accessible to them in the Houston, Texas area where a lot of their alumni base is, and in the state of Louisiana, and just the South in general. Brian Kelly thought that this was the place he could win a national championship. He didn't think he could do that at Notre Dame. That's why he left. He saw that there was a ceiling for the type of talent that he could attract there. And that's why he chose LSU. And the whole evolution of the transfer portal and NIL and all this stuff has kind of thrown a wrench in it, but he's got to evolve once again. Meanwhile, on the other side of that game, in the swamp, things are looking up for Billy Napier and his prize recruit, DJ Lagway. When he's the starting QB, folks, this is a competitive team. I mean, if you look at the Texas game where he missed the game due to injury, final score is 49-17, and they couldn't really move the ball. And at towards the end of the game, Texas was mailing it in because I think they were up like 35-0 at halftime. So the second half was just really a walkthrough. But, this is a team that was competitive against Georgia for a little bit until, Lagway had to leave the game. And then, you've beaten Kentucky, you've beaten a few people that they didn't expect you to beat because, you were expected to not be bowl eligible. But sure enough, if they beat Ole Miss or FSU, and unfortunately, folks, it's hard for me to say this, but it's more likely than not that they are going to beat FSU. It's going to be a bowl eligible team, and I didn't expect that coming into the season, and I know a lot of pundits didn't either. They was expecting this to be the swan song of Billy Napier, but a few weeks ago, the Gator administration came out and said he's coming back next season, and they're going to build off of this. Gainesville attracts a lot of talent from the talent-rich state of Florida, and you would think that people would find it appealing, young kids would find it appealing, seeing that he's willing to play younger kids, willing to put them into the fire and see if they succeed. And it's paying off. There was a report earlier in the season where the defensive group came to him and said, hey, we need to simplify the defense. This is why we're missing a lot of assignments because there's too many calls coming in. And, some coaches would have said, listen, learn the playbook. But, Billy listened to his students or his players and said, you know what, you're right, let's simplify it. And then they've looked impressive ever since. But again, you take Tennessee to overtime. You soundly beat Kentucky. You're competitive against Georgia. You beat LSU. Again, you lost to Texas without DJ. You beat UCF. You trounced Mississippi State. They did just enough to beat the people that they should have beat. And that LSU game really puts them in line to make a bowl game. And again, that's a lot better than what a lot of people thought coming into the season. Moving on. Is Texas okay? I mean, in the midway point of my review of the college football season, they were one of my more impressive teams. But ever since the middle of October, they have not looked the same. The questions about the running backs and how they lost two top-tier talents to season-ending injuries before the season started, is starting to rear its head at the worst possible time. And the O-line, which was thought to be a strength all season, has started to show a lot of holes. I mean, Arkansas is a solid team at best, but they had 9 tackles for losses. And we all saw the Georgia game a few weeks ago. They got pushed around against Georgia. They snuck by Vanderbilt. And, beating Arkansas 20-10, isn't that impressive? Things aren't looking as high as they were, again, during that mid-year review that I did. The defense is making its mark. There's no question about that. But this offense, which is incredible considering you have, the talent they have at wide receiver, at quarterback, and you have Steve Sarkisian as your play caller, it's just not, it's leaving a lot to be desired. Quinn Ewers hasn't looked right since he came back from the injury. So we'll see how it plays out against Texas A&M, because those are the top 2 teams in the SEC right now in terms of their record. They both have 1 loss. And there's a lot of tiebreakers that are going to happen, whoever loses that game. And even if Texas, in all likelihood, is going to make the playoffs, whether they make the SEC championship game or not, but what's going to happen when they go up against a physical team? In all likelihood, they're going to face Georgia maybe at some point in the playoffs. Probably going to face Oregon again if they don't win the SEC championship game. They might run into an Ohio State. There's going to be some physical team that they're going to run into, and are they going to be able to respond? So far this season, it looks questionable. As we get deeper into the season, how Texas will be able to respond to it. Speaking of Georgia, the Dogs righted the ship against Tennessee in a 31-17 victory in Athens. Carson Beck, the throw of 12 interceptions the past 6 games at 346 yards and totaled 3 touchdowns. And again, this isn't the Georgia the past few years that just absolutely ran roughshod over college football. They don't really have any wide receivers that bring fear, not explosive playmakers. Their secondary is young, and you can kind of attack them in that way. But, and also their D-line is good. It's not great. But I'm telling you, there's about maybe 2 to 3 teams. And I know this is a tired discussion or argument about Georgia, because at the end of the day, you do need to win games. I don't want to get that lost in this discussion. You do need to win games. It doesn't matter who you have on your schedule, what's put in front of you. At the end of the day, you have to win out. Unless you're FSU in 2023, then you get rewarded for it. But there's about 2, maybe 3 teams that would want to go toe-to-toe with Georgia and feel like they can win. Other than that, it's, again, we've been saying it all year. Georgia's one of the most talented rosters in the country. It's just a matter of putting it together game in and game out. If Carson Beck can limit the turnovers and stop putting the defense in bad positions, Kirby Smart can call up a game plan better than anyone to stop really good offenses. Look at Texas. That was a masterclass. Even the second half against Alabama, yeah, you got punched in the mouth in the first half, but the second half, they pretty much held Alabama under control outside of that, last 2 minutes or whatever. So it's just going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks with the SEC. Because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I know Georgia has Georgia Tech. And then outside of that, they have one more game besides that. But obviously the Georgia Tech game doesn't count for SEC play. But yeah, I think they're done with SEC play. Yeah, they have Massachusetts and Georgia, so they're going to finish with 2 losses in the SEC. Again, we're going to see all the tiebreaker stuff. That's where the intrigue is going to be. Who's going to win the Texas A&M Texas game and how everything's going to break from there. So that's where a lot of the intrigue is over the next few weeks. BYU's Magic finally runs out as they fall to Kansas 17-13. The key in this game was BYU was just 2 of 4 in the red zone, and they came away with no touchdowns on all 4 drives inside the 20. You can't do that. You absolutely cannot do that. And unfortunately, that's where, again, these one-score games that they were squeaking by, they just didn't have it in this game. So we'll see where they rank in the college football playoff rankings, because that's honestly what matters. It doesn't really matter what the AP poll says. But they still have a shot if they win their conference. There's going to be an ability to make the college football playoffs in that sense. So Oregon, number 1 team in the country, went to Madison, Wisconsin, I believe is where Wisconsin plays. And they snuck by, slipped by, slithered by 16-13 as the offense finally sputtered for the first time this year. It's their lowest output since they faced Georgia in 2022, I believe it was, where they scored only 3 points or whatever it was in that demolishment in Dan Lanning's first year. Defense held the Badgers to 226 total yards, but the Ducks refused to put the game away at any point. I mean, in the first 3 series, Oregon outgained Wisconsin 152 to -3 total yards, and they were only up 6-0. That's obviously not ideal. With a bye week and then a matchup against Washington, the Ducks faithful need to hope that the team got this out of their system and Dan Lanning and company can right the ship, going into the Big Ten championship game and into the college football playoffs. From here, we'll do a few quick hits. Notre Dame continues its quest to remove NIU from the memories of the college football world with a 35-14 win versus Virginia. Again, they're going to if they win out, they're making the playoffs. I know the NIU game was embarrassing, but they're going to win everything out. So even if they went undefeated, they still wouldn't be a top 4 seed due to the independent labeling that they have. So they're not going to get one of those seats. The highest they can do is 5, I believe. But still, it's clear that Notre Dame has pretty much righted the ship. And then you're going to be favored against everybody. They were favored against everybody going into the season. Maybe, I don't know if they were favored in the Texas A&M game because it was at Texas A&M. But yeah, the NIU lost hurts, but they're really doing their best to make people forget about it, and they've done a pretty good job so far. Louisville loses 38-35 as I believe it was a 20.5 point favorite or 21 point favorite, blowing a 14-point fourth quarter lead as the Stanford Cardinals hit a field goal as time expired. That's not what you really want to see from Louisville if you were a UM fan or an ACC fan in general, because Louisville's argument was that they had 1 possession losses to top tier teams, and you beat Clemson as well. So it's just a bunch of 1 possession losses, and yet this one looks ugly, especially going up 35-21 in the fourth quarter. You can't lose that game. But they found a way to do it. Arizona State is 8-2 after beating Kansas State, a ranked Kansas State team. And this is only Kenny Dillingham's second year. And the former alum is ahead of schedule with this team. And with his ability to recruit, keeping certain people and or legends from the Arizona coaching landscape on the team in some sort of capacity, and being a young head coach allows for him to recruit better than, I don't know, just obviously someone older. You can communicate to the youths better. I fully expect on him to build on this in the transfer portal and in recruiting, and just building up for next year. Not saying they're going to be a national championship contender, but this is the type of home run hire that Arizona State was hoping for when they hired Kenny. And here it is, the fruits of their labor in year 2 already. This is going to increase fan interaction. This is going to increase boosters and their want or desire to keep the team relevant. And it's just only positives you can take away from the season for them. 8-2 is magical. So kudos to Dillingham, former FSU offensive coordinator, for helping his alma mater reach these new heights now. And finally, who's going to face SMU in the ACC championship game? Clemson finishes their ACC schedule at 7-1 because they face the Citadel and South Carolina in the next 2 games. And UM is currently sitting at 5-1 with games remaining against Wake Forest and Syracuse. The Wake Forest game should be an easy one for UM. The Syracuse one is one where they may have a little bit of trouble, but again, you're significantly more talented than Syracuse. You should be able to win that. Clemson could climb all the way back from their losses to Georgia and more recently Louisville to take on SMU and win the ACC championship game or the ACC championship crown. But an SMU-UM matchup would have a lot of fireworks. SMU's got a few transfers from UM, like Brashard Smith off the top of my head. I remember him. And I know they have a few like defensive tackles or defensive linemen that transferred from UM to there. And Rhett Lashley was your offensive coordinator a few years ago. And we all have seen how mediocre the UM defense has been, but you have Cam Ward and company on the offense. So fireworks galore. That would be a high-scoring game if you ask me. So that's it for the wrap-up this week's, folks. We might have some more insight onto recruiting for FSU and or UM, primarily probably FSU because they've had some decommits and they've had some crystal balls go their way for certain prospects, but we don't want to get too ahead of that just yet. Excuse me. But we're going to keep on churning out the content. We'll find something to talk about for FSU and UM this week before their matchups against Charleston Southern and Wake Forest. So we'll see if FSU can double up their win total, and we'll see if UM can go on to try and finish the season with only 1 loss. So thanks for sticking around for this episode, folks. Thanks for stopping by. And you know the drill. I did not forget it. I was wrapping it up, but then I just remembered. You can catch us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube, where these podcasts are posts. And, you don't necessarily have to listen to them in long form. You can just consume a little bit here and there. I don't mind. Like, subscribe, follow. Do all that stuff to get those notifications turned on for this podcast so you get it in your ears as soon as possible, or on that Bluetooth in your car for those rides to and from work. Anyways, folks, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for hanging out. And we're going to catch you next time here on 305 Insights. Have a good one, folks.